Screaming into the phone, Meghan Markle shouts, "They're kidnapping my husband." And within minutes, U.S. police stormed the estate. In an unprecedented clash between two nations, Meghan Markle calls 911 as British royal agents arrive in California to escort Prince Harry back to the UK, triggering a full-blown American police response that nearly spirals into an international scandal. What really happened behind those Montecito gates? Why did Harry agree to leave? And is Meghan's shocking claim of kidnapping part of a desperate legal play, or something far more explosive? Stay tuned, because what we've uncovered will leave you speechless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Under the golden California sun, nestled within the tranquil hills of Montecito, the peaceful rhythm of life was suddenly shattered by piercing sirens. It was a Tuesday afternoon like any other. Clear skies, quiet streets, and the occasional black SUV rolling past towering hedges and manicured driveways. But on this day, something happened that would send shockwaves through not just the neighborhood, not just the state, but the entire globe. Just after 2 p.m., multiple emergency response vehicles raced toward a sprawling mansion known to the public only in whispers and blurry paparazzi photos, the private residence of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Within moments, a 911 dispatch call surfaced, and its content was nothing short of surreal. The voice on the line was frantic, unmistakable. A woman, near tears, shouted, "They're kidnapping my husband. Someone stop them. Please, he's being taken." That voice, beyond any doubt, belonged to Meghan Markle. The Duchess of Sussex, once an American actress, now the most polarizing royal figure in modern history, was calling the police. And she wasn't reporting a burglary or a domestic disturbance. She was reporting what she claimed to be an international crime, an attempted kidnapping, by none other than members of the British royal staff, who, according to multiple confirmed reports, had arrived in California under diplomatic and legal orders to take Prince Harry back to the United Kingdom. Witnesses from nearby estates say they heard screaming coming from the mansion, followed by what sounded like a scuffle. One neighbor, who chose to remain anonymous, described the moment as something out of a movie. "First, we heard the sirens, and then we saw all these men in suits, some with British accents, moving quickly, looking serious, but calm. Then the screaming began. It was Meghan. She was yelling, 'Help! They're taking him. Somebody call the police.'" The situation escalated rapidly. According to a high-level law enforcement source familiar with the incident, the call prompted an immediate response from Santa Barbara County Sheriff's deputies, who arrived on the scene expecting to deal with a violent abduction. But what they found wasn't a masked gang or armed robbers. It was a convoy of formally dressed British officials standing at the gates, accompanied by legal paperwork and diplomatic credentials. Inside, Prince Harry was reportedly calm but pale. His bags were already packed. Security camera footage, according to a leak that is now under investigation, shows Harry walking toward the door with 2 British aides beside him. He paused, looked back, and said something inaudible to Meghan, who then dropped her phone and lunged forward, physically placing herself between Harry and the doorway. What happened next is still a matter of dispute. Some sources allege Meghan threw a vase. Others say she collapsed into hysterics, screaming, "You can't take him," and attempted to physically block the royal staff. Still others claim she shouted threats about calling President Biden and invoking international law. The only consistent detail is the one heard in the 911 call: "They're kidnapping my husband." The police, not aware of any formal international custody or extradition request at that moment, treated the situation as a potential domestic kidnapping. Officers ordered everyone to step away from the premises. British officials, stunned but cooperative, began producing documentation. A 20-minute standoff ensued where no one moved. Helicopters circled overhead. The FBI was reportedly contacted to verify the authenticity of the British officials' presence. And in the middle of it all stood Prince Harry, not handcuffed, not resisting, but caught in a psychological and emotional tug-of-war that may very well mark the end of an era. But to understand how we got to this moment, this literal breaking point, we must rewind. The saga of Harry and Meghan has always felt like a Hollywood script that never ends. Since stepping back from royal duties in 2020, the couple has lived in a strange limbo, part celebrities, part exiles, part global activists. They secured Netflix deals, Spotify podcasts, and staged interviews that set media records and broke royal protocols. But the real drama has always taken place behind the scenes. And while Meghan's name often dominates headlines, this time it's Harry who's at the center of a governmental, legal, and familial whirlwind. Behind closed doors, pressure had been building for months. According to insiders at the Home Office, Prince Harry's visa status in the United States had come under renewed scrutiny, especially after he admitted past drug use in his memoir Spare. Advocacy groups, media watchdogs, and immigration law specialists began questioning whether Harry had received preferential treatment, and if his disclosures made his continued residency legally questionable. Then came the quiet but firm paperwork from the British government. Prince Harry was to return to the United Kingdom. The move was phrased diplomatically, for consultation and reassessment of royal affairs, but no one missed the subtext. This was not a voluntary homecoming. This was a recall, not from a job, but from an identity, a position, a lifestyle, and perhaps even a marriage. Sources close to the royal household suggest that King Charles himself signed off on the return order, with Princess and Prince William providing discreet but unyielding support. The objective? To re-establish the royal order, and perhaps to finally bring the wayward prince back into the fold, with or without his American wife. It's no secret that tension between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family had escalated, but few predicted it would reach this level of open confrontation. The decision to extract Harry from his California residence was not taken lightly. Months of legal groundwork, cross-border diplomatic discussions, and quiet surveillance reportedly went into the planning. And yet, Meghan either wasn't informed or chose not to believe it would happen. Her decision to call 911, to involve American law enforcement, to trigger an international incident with a single phone call, these were not the actions of someone caught off guard. These were the actions of someone trying to stop a machine that was already in motion. A machine built by centuries of tradition, power, and protocol. As sirens faded and the dust settled on the Montecito estate, Meghan was seen sitting on the front steps, clutching a phone, surrounded by security personnel. Prince Harry, on the other hand, was gone. Taken? Escorted? Rescued? Returned? The terminology depends on who you ask. To British officials, it was a necessary retrieval of a royal figure who had strayed too far for too long. To American authorities, it was a bizarre and unprecedented diplomatic tug-of-war. And to Meghan Markle, it was something far more personal. It was, in her own words, a kidnapping. The consequences of this moment, political, emotional, and symbolic, have only just begun to unfold. Inside Buckingham Palace, damage control is underway. In Washington, officials are examining the diplomatic legality of what transpired. And in California, lawyers are likely preparing for one of the most public legal battles in modern memory. For now, though, the world watches, stunned and divided. Is this the story of a woman fighting for her husband? A royal family enforcing centuries-old protocol? Or the final unraveling of a marriage that was always, in some ways, doomed from the start? One thing is certain. What happened in that single minute, that one desperate, explosive moment when Meghan Markle dialed 911, has changed everything. The stillness of the Montecito afternoon stood in sharp contrast to the inner turbulence gripping Prince Harry as he faced a moment he never believed would come. The mansion that once felt like a safe harbor, a defiant refuge from royal expectations, was now surrounded by unfamiliar vehicles, quietly humming with diplomatic seriousness. The garden was still pristine. The trees whispered nothing. But inside, time had stopped. The corridor leading from the main bedroom down to the grand entrance hall had never felt so long. Each step echoed not just on the polished wood floor but deep inside his conscience. 2 British officials in tailored navy suits flanked him. They weren't guards. They weren't friends either. Their role was somewhere in between, discreet envoys of a family that had lost patience. Prince Harry's eyes remained fixed forward, but his thoughts raced with unanswered questions. How had this plan come together without his knowledge? Was this orchestrated by King Charles himself, or William? Did Meghan know and keep it from him? Or had the betrayal come from someone within their inner circle? The answers remained suspended in a fog of silence. The officials hadn't spoken much. In fact, they'd said only what was necessary. We're here under orders from the Home Office. There's been a request for you to return to the United Kingdom. Your presence is required. The tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Earlier that morning, Harry had received a letter, hand-delivered. A thick envelope with no return address, bearing the royal arms. He opened it with a strange detachment, half believing it was ceremonial or harmless. But it wasn't. It was a formal summons, citing legal and national obligations related to former royal status and immigration considerations. The wording was vague, the intent unmistakable. He showed Meghan. She panicked. He didn't. At least not right away. He assumed it was a warning. But it wasn't a warning. It was step one of an already executed plan. By early afternoon, just as Meghan had stepped into a video conference for an Archwell Foundation planning meeting, the driveway gate buzzed. Security informed them of two individuals from the British consulate requesting entry. When Harry looked out the window and saw them, calm, composed, dressed in suits that screamed government business, his gut twisted. The instructions had been clear. Pack essentials. Be ready to leave. Do not attempt to delay. British authorities had arrived with the cooperation of certain American legal representatives. While the British team had no legal right to arrest or forcibly remove Harry, they did possess a set of documents intended to pressure compliance, most notably his possible immigration breach in the U.S., and his current visa status being under immediate review. Behind the curtain of legality, this was a political chess move dressed in paperwork and courtesy. According to sources close to the royal household, this was a long time coming. The tipping point had occurred months earlier when Prince Harry's visa renewal came under fire due to his public admission of past drug use. Normally, such a disclosure would be grounds for denial or deportation. In Harry's case, exceptions seemed to have been made, until someone within the British establishment decided to leverage it. One senior former Home Office advisor described the maneuver as an elegant entrapment. The United Kingdom couldn't force a foreign government to send back a private citizen, but they could prompt an investigation. And once the U.S. agencies began examining Harry's records, all that was left was a quiet conversation between two allies across the Atlantic. In the entrance hall, Meghan stood in front of the door, breathless, blocking the threshold. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice trembling not from fear, but fury. "I don't have a choice," Harry answered, more resigned than defiant. "Yes, you do. You always do." The officials remained behind him, silent. This wasn't their moment. This was a private fracture spilling into a public event. The tension in that hallway was beyond words. It was the culmination of years of rebellion, press wars, Netflix documentaries, and desperate attempts at carving out a new identity. A staff member had quietly rolled out a carry-on suitcase. Inside were a few tailored suits, some personal documents, and a framed photo of Archie and Lilibet. Harry hadn't packed it. The staff had. Someone had been preparing behind his back. Someone had known. Meghan's voice cracked. "If you leave now, they'll never let you come back. You know that, right? They're going to bury you there. Is that what you want?" Harry didn't answer. Because deep down, he didn't know. At that moment, their security director received a message on his phone. Meghan had dialed 911. The American emergency services were now en route. And everything escalated. Within minutes, black and white SUVs pulled up outside. Red and blue lights bathed the ivy-covered mansion. The neighbors, already aware of the residence's celebrity status, began to peek through their curtains. The local sheriff's department had received a report of an attempted kidnapping involving an international figure. The dispatcher didn't know what to believe, but law required a swift response. When the officers entered the estate, the first thing they saw was Meghan standing between her husband and two formally dressed men. She was crying. "They're taking him. They're taking him now. This is illegal. Someone help." The police were confused but professional. Weapons were not drawn, but their presence was firm. They demanded IDs from the British personnel. The staff complied. They handed over folders, digital verification, and consulate documents. The American officers began scanning the paperwork. One officer gently approached Harry. "Sir, do you feel unsafe? Are you leaving against your will?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Meghan stepped in. "Of course he is. Look at this." They cornered him. They brought paperwork without warning. He hasn't even had legal counsel. This is unlawful. But Harry raised his hand. "It's okay," he said. "It's not okay," Meghan snapped back. "It's not okay, and you know it." Harry looked at the officer, then at Meghan, then back at the officer again. "They're not forcing me. I'm just going home for a bit. That's all." The officer nodded. "You're sure?" Harry hesitated for a full second, then said, "Yes." That one word ended the standoff. Not legally, not emotionally, but practically. The officers had no further grounds to intervene. A departing adult male, no coercion, no physical force. The report would be filed, the documentation reviewed, and the British staff cleared. But the psychological damage had already been done. As the officers exited the residence, Meghan remained standing in the doorway, visibly shaken, unwilling to move. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face had changed. It wasn't fear now, it was fury. Betrayal. A silent war exploding across her eyes. Harry turned to her. "This isn't goodbye. It's not permanent." She didn't answer. She didn't blink. He stepped into the waiting car. A sleek, quiet, black vehicle designed not to attract attention, but to erase the man inside from California without incident. And just like that, the gates closed. From inside the car, Harry looked back one last time. The house, the life he'd built, the rebellion he had once believed in, it was all behind him now. Ahead of him, a private jet, a quiet flight, and a return to a land he had once turned his back on. And maybe, just maybe, he was returning to the very throne he once tried to escape. The moment Meghan Markle picked up the phone and dialed 911, she wasn't acting from a place of confusion or even fear. She was acting from a place of raw desperation. The kind of desperation that only arises when everything you've built, your home, your public image, your sense of control, is slipping through your fingers in real time. In those few minutes, as she watched British officials escort Prince Harry toward a waiting vehicle, something inside her snapped. The calm, composed media-trained Duchess disappeared. What remained was a woman watching her world collapse, and she did what anyone feeling powerless might do. She screamed for help. 911. "What is your emergency?" the dispatcher asked, as per protocol. The voice that came through was frantic, emotional, and unmistakable. "This is Meghan Markle. I need help right now. They're kidnapping my husband. Please, send someone. Send everyone. He's being taken against his will." The dispatcher, stunned for a split second, snapped back into duty. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Are you saying someone is trying to kidnap Prince Harry?" "Yes," Meghan shouted, breathless. "They're in suits. They said they're with the UK government, but they have no right. This is our home. They can't take him." From that point, every second mattered. The dispatcher flagged the call as a high-priority possible hostage situation, international figure. Within moments, sheriff units were en route. What the responding officers didn't know at that moment was that the so-called kidnappers were royal agents, authorized personnel operating with diplomatic coordination. What they knew was that Meghan Markle had just accused foreign nationals of abducting one of the most recognizable men in the world. As the 911 call continued, Meghan paced the marble floors of her Montecito living room. Her voice rose and fell with panic, not theatrics. She was genuinely distraught. "He doesn't want to go. He told me last night that he's scared. They've been watching us. They brought documents. They showed up without warning. Please, please get someone here before they're gone." The dispatcher tried to slow her down. "Ma'am, is he being restrained? They're surrounding him. He's not in handcuffs, but they boxed him in. They're using some kind of pressure, I don't know. It's not normal. I think it's illegal." The call went on for nearly 5 minutes. Meghan provided her address, described the individuals, and begged that officers arrive with full force to prevent what she claimed was an unlawful removal. Throughout the call, there were audible sounds of confusion and chaos in the background, a staff member trying to calm her down, a child's distant voice, possibly Archie, and the low, unflinching tones of British voices speaking firmly to Harry. For Meghan, this wasn't just about Harry leaving. This was about losing the one person who had chosen her over the monarchy, over his family, over centuries of royal blood and responsibility. To see him now being pulled back, not by his own volition but by outside forces, was more than she could tolerate. In that moment, the betrayal wasn't only by the royal family, it was, in her eyes, by Harry too. After hanging up, Meghan collapsed onto the edge of the staircase. Her body trembled. The phone slipped from her hand. A house manager rushed in to ask what was going on, but she said nothing. She didn't have to. The sirens were already getting louder. Meanwhile, the dispatcher had already briefed the responding officers. Confirmed identity of reporting party is Meghan Markle. Reported attempted kidnapping of Prince Harry by individuals claiming to be British authorities. Possible diplomatic entanglement. Use caution, verify identification, await FBI contact. This wasn't just a typical police call anymore. It was a geopolitical time bomb ticking on American soil. First squad cars arrived within minutes. Officers approached cautiously but quickly, unsure what they were stepping into. The estate's private security had already opened the gate but remained hands-off. Their instructions were clear: let local law enforcement take the lead, especially when it came to anything involving federal or diplomatic implications. As officers entered the estate, they immediately made contact with Meghan. She ran toward them, no longer crying, but incensed. They're inside. They're trying to take him right now. They said he has to leave, that he has no choice. That's not true. That's not legal. He's an American resident. One officer pulled her aside gently but firmly. We're going to handle it. Please stay calm. Where is he right now? In the main foyer, she answered. They're trying to put him in a car. Officers moved into position, entering the home and confronting the scene in real time. Prince Harry stood calmly in the foyer, hands in his coat pockets. His expression was one of sadness, not alarm. The two British officials near him stood with briefcases and identification already in hand, anticipating confrontation. One of the deputies radioed in. Subject is secure. No signs of force. Engaging with foreign nationals claiming diplomatic status. Requesting FBI liaison confirmation. Meghan burst into the room seconds later, pushing past another officer. Tell them you don't want to go, she screamed. Harry turned slowly. His eyes met hers, and for a second, the room seemed to freeze. The officers stood still. The aides stopped moving. Even Meghan stopped breathing. There was no script for this moment. No rehearsed line. No spin. I told you already, Harry said softly. I don't want to go. But I have to. His voice was calm, but resolute. Meghan's composure collapsed once again. No, you don't, she muttered. They can't force you. We're in America. You have rights. But the issue wasn't rights. It was leverage. The documents provided by the British team outlined his visa situation. If he did not comply with the voluntary recall, there was a very real risk that the United States could be compelled to reconsider his immigration status entirely. In layman's terms, stay and risk being forcibly deported under worse optics. Leave quietly and possibly return once the legal and royal matters are addressed. The officers, having verified the diplomatic documentation, stepped back. One of them addressed Meghan directly. We've reviewed the situation. There's no immediate sign of coercion or threat. Prince Harry has confirmed he's going willingly. There's nothing further we can do here, ma'am. Meghan looked around the room in disbelief. So that's it. You're letting them take him? The officer replied with care, but finality. He's not under arrest. He's not being taken by force. He's a free man, making a choice. It's not our role to interfere with that. And just like that, the jurisdictional boundary was drawn. American police had done their job, ensured safety, verified legality, and ensured no crime was in progress. But the emotional devastation unfolding wasn't within their authority to heal or prevent. As they exited, Meghan sank to the floor. Staff members stood silently, unsure of what to say or do. Even the British officials seemed unsure how to proceed. They gave Harry a respectful moment. He knelt beside Meghan. I'll come back, he said. She shook her head. You won't. They're taking you forever. You know that. Harry didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Because deep down, even he wasn't sure if she was wrong. The audio of the 911 call, though never officially released to the public, was confirmed by law enforcement sources and widely reported by credible media outlets. The phrase, "they're kidnapping my husband," became a media firestorm, triggering everything from memes to serious diplomatic analysis. In the following hours, pundits, politicians, and commentators weighed in. Was this a woman's desperate attempt to protect her family, or a reckless abuse of emergency services? Did Meghan have grounds to suspect foul play, or was this another PR disaster? And above all, had this call sealed the final crack in the foundation of their already fragile union? That call changed everything. Not just the events of the day, but the public's perception. It turned a quiet recall into an international headline. It forced the royal family to respond. It put the American justice system on alert. And most significantly, it exposed the reality of a woman grasping at control as her world was quietly and methodically dismantled. When the patrol cars rolled to a stop outside the Montecito estate, the quiet, polished calm of the neighborhood was replaced with a swelling tide of unease. This wasn't a normal call, and every officer knew it. The address was familiar. They had responded in the past to security complaints, trespassing paparazzi, and the occasional overzealous fan. But this was different. The dispatcher's voice had been sharp. The words kidnapping, Prince Harry, and diplomatic personnel weren't typical for even the most high-profile incidents in their jurisdiction. Two sheriff's deputies from Santa Barbara County stepped out first. Backup arrived seconds later. Then a third cruiser. They approached the gates and were met not with chaos or violence, but with a calculated, organized calm that made them uneasy. The estate's private security, well-trained, stone-faced, and undoubtedly briefed, stood ready to grant access. Their body language showed no signs of panic. Instead, they looked like they were following orders carefully crafted in a boardroom far above their pay grade. Deputy Ruiz and Deputy Matthews were the first to cross the threshold. Guns holstered, hands resting on duty belts, they moved with the confident caution reserved for high-pressure situations that involved elite or protected individuals. As they reached the front courtyard, the tension hit like a wall. Two men in tailored suits stood by the doorway, each holding identification folders embossed with a royal seal and a secondary crest belonging to the British Consular Corps. "Good afternoon, officers," one of them said calmly. "I'm Charles Whitaker, attached to the United Kingdom's North American Diplomatic Affairs Unit. This is my colleague, Adrian Cole, Royal Affairs Liaison. We are here under direction from the Home Office, executing a private diplomatic retrieval mission." The deputies exchanged glances. Ruiz spoke first. "We received a 911 call reporting a kidnapping in progress. We need to see all identification, and we need to speak directly with the individual in question, Prince Harry." "Of course," Whitaker responded smoothly. "We expected a reaction. All documentation is here. You'll find verifiable diplomatic authorization, as well as coordination contact information for our Consul General in Los Angeles." They handed over 3 separate laminated credentials and a black folder containing digital links to encrypted government clearance portals. The deputies didn't immediately react. Their training had not prepared them for a royal standoff in suburban California, and certainly not one triggered by an emergency call from a global celebrity. Inside the house, Prince Harry was visible through the wide, open doorway. He stood near the grand staircase, speaking in low tones to someone out of view. Meghan was not yet visible, but her voice, strained, angry, carried through the open air like the heat radiating off the pavement. "I won't let them take you," she said. Another set of officers arrived, this time from the Federal Diplomatic Protection Division. They had been dispatched moments after Santa Barbara authorities reported possible involvement of international agents. These weren't regular patrol officers. They were specially trained to deal with foreign diplomatic incidents on U.S. soil, especially when those incidents could potentially spark diplomatic fallout. Agent Monica Chin stepped forward. She was seasoned, composed, and had dealt with her fair share of high-profile tensions. Her first act was to secure the perimeter, assigning officers to record all movements, confirm identities, and ensure no party escalated the situation physically. She called out to Whitaker and Cole. "We need to speak to Prince Harry immediately." In private, Whitaker hesitated. "With respect, Agent Chin, we were instructed not to allow unsanctioned media or legal interference." Chin shot him a measured look. "This is not interference. This is United States jurisdiction. If there's any indication that he's under duress or not leaving voluntarily, we are bound by law to intervene. Now move aside." Whitaker complied. Harry stepped forward. His face was pale, his voice measured. "I'm not being forced. This isn't a kidnapping." Meghan followed close behind him. Her expression had shifted, less panic now, more fury, steeled determination. "He doesn't want this," she said. "This is coercion. They brought documents, but they didn't go through legal channels. No subpoenas, no court orders. Just intimidation." Chin turned to Harry. "Is what she's saying true, sir? Are you being intimidated or coerced in any way?" Harry looked down for a moment, then met Chin's eyes. "No. It's complicated. But no, I'm going because I believe I need to." Meghan threw up her hands. "They've gotten to him already." A second agent, Ramirez, began inspecting the documents handed over by the British team. His laptop was already connected to the encrypted network listed in the diplomatic packet. After a few tense minutes, he confirmed the credentials were legitimate. "They're clean," he said to Chin. "Everything checks out. They've got consulate and home office authorization. No arrest. Just a summons to return. Technically voluntary, though it's definitely pressure-based." "Legal gray zone," Chin muttered. Wonderful. What unfolded next was not the dramatic showdown that many expected. There were no handcuffs, no forced removals. But the tension in that room was suffocating. Every glance, every breath, carried the weight of unspoken consequences. Meghan's silence became louder than her screams. Her hands trembled at her sides, fists clenched, as she stared at the man who had once renounced a kingdom for her, and who now, under duress or duty, was turning back toward it. The American officers, now caught between ensuring legal protocol and calming a potential diplomatic flare-up, asked for a private room to speak with Harry one final time. Inside the study, away from Meghan and the British team, Agent Chin sat with him alone. "You have the right to stay here," she said gently. "You're not under arrest. There's no legal extradition. If you want, we can hold this up. We can bring in immigration lawyers. You can challenge everything." Harry gave a small, weary smile. "I know, but the longer I delay, the worse it becomes. I've already been warned. If I don't cooperate now, I'll be made to later, through uglier means. And the media circus that follows won't help me, or my family, or the kids." Chin asked, "And what about her, Meghan?" Harry looked away. "I'll come back." "I have to believe that." Back in the foyer, Meghan paced like a trapped animal. Her legal counsel was already on the phone, demanding clarification from embassy contacts, threatening lawsuits, citing international violations. The British agents kept their distance, speaking only when addressed, remaining composed despite the hostility brewing in every corner of the room. Eventually, Agent Chin emerged. "He's going voluntarily," she announced. "There's no cause for interference. This is no longer a law enforcement issue." The disappointment on Meghan's face was visible, deep, sharp, and cutting. Whitaker nodded once and stepped toward Harry. "We're ready to leave when you are, sir." Harry turned to Meghan. There were no final embraces. No whispered apologies. Just one long look between two people caught between love and loyalty, between freedom and heritage. "Take care of the kids," he said softly. "You should be saying that to yourself," Meghan snapped. Outside, the vehicles waited. The press, surprisingly, had not yet arrived. The operation had been too fast, too quiet, and too well-timed. Within the hour, however, someone would leak a cell phone video of the scene. A grainy clip showing Harry stepping into the black vehicle, Meghan in the doorway, arms folded, motionless. It would go viral within minutes. As the convoy drove away, escorted quietly by diplomatic protection officers, Meghan remained standing in the driveway, staring at the horizon as though expecting someone to stop the entire event with a single phone call. But no call came. In Washington, D.C., the State Department was already debriefed. In London, the palace had received confirmation that the handover was completed without incident. And in Montecito, an American woman who had once captured a prince stood alone in the ruins of a narrative she had worked so hard to control. This wasn't just a clash between American police and British agents. This was a deeper collision between personal freedom and inherited duty, between diplomacy and emotion, between a couple and the forces they had tried to escape for years. Prince Harry sat in the back of the black diplomatic vehicle as it pulled away from his Montecito residence. Each foot of pavement covered bringing him farther from the life he had chosen and deeper into the life he had tried to leave behind. The windows were tinted, his seat reclined slightly, and the cabin was unnervingly quiet. No one spoke. Even the driver, a British security operative, avoided making eye contact. In the silence, Harry's mind was anything but still. He replayed the past hour in his head like a bad dream that refused to end. Meghan's voice, desperate and piercing. The flashing lights of American police vehicles. The calm, surgical movements of the royal envoys. The moment he told Agent Chin that he wasn't being coerced. He had meant it, but not fully. Not in the way she probably understood it. He wasn't being physically coerced. No one had dragged him out. But pressure? It had been there for months. Pressure from both sides. From the British establishment. From Meghan. From his own growing doubts. This wasn't an abduction. It was surrender. His phone was off. He had been asked, politely but firmly, to leave it behind. The explanation was framed around security and signal tracking, but the unspoken truth was clearer. They didn't want him texting anyone. They didn't want leaks. They didn't want Meghan following the convoy or the plane or disrupting the return flight. In that car, and soon on that plane, Prince Harry was alone. As the vehicle wound its way toward the Santa Barbara Airport's private terminal, Harry stared blankly out the window. The California coastline faded into the distance. The same hills that had once offered him anonymity, the same sunlit paths he had strolled with Archie, The same cafes where no one dared approach without permission, they were now behind him, physically and symbolically. He thought of his children, of Archie's bedtime questions, and of Lilibet's barely formed words and her small hands clutching at his shoulder. He had said goodbye quickly. Meghan had tried to stop him from even doing that, insisting he wasn't going anywhere. But he had kissed each of them on the forehead while Meghan had stepped into another room to make phone calls. He whispered to Archie, "Be good to your mom. I'll be back soon." But would he? No one had told him how long he would be gone. That was the unspoken part of this entire ordeal. This wasn't a 3-day visit or a short appearance for a royal function. This was open-ended. This was a return that didn't come with a guaranteed return ticket. According to royal protocol, the phrase used internally was reinstatement evaluation. On paper, it was a review of his royal position, future responsibilities, and re-entry into certain institutions. But beneath the civility, everyone understood the deeper implications. His marriage, his residency, his entire identity outside the monarchy, all of it was under scrutiny. The palace, and more specifically King Charles and Prince William, were reportedly united in their position. They believed Harry had gone too far. The Netflix series, the memoir, the interviews, the legal accusations against British tabloids, it wasn't just disobedience anymore. It was betrayal. But what haunted Harry more than his father's or brother's opinions was the realization that somewhere along the way, he had lost control. When he had first left, he believed it was a bold act of agency, a modern man choosing love and mental health over rigid institutions. He believed in the freedom he had carved out with Meghan, the freedom to raise their children how they chose, the freedom to build a brand that wasn't dictated by palace scripts. But now, sitting in that car, he questioned it all. Because freedom without stability wasn't freedom. It was chaos. And over the last year, he had begun to see cracks in the very foundation of the life they had built. There were the lavish spending habits, the increasingly tense discussions about press control, the constant PR strategies to stay relevant, the lawsuits, the Netflix expectations, the interviews they had agreed to but then regretted afterward, and Meghan's recent mood shifts, one moment lovingly attentive, the next cold and combative, had made him feel increasingly cornered. There had been fights, not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, repeating kind. The kind that chip away at the heart over time. She wanted him to sue the British government over security. He wasn't sure. She wanted him to attend fewer royal events. He felt conflicted. She wanted full control over their brand's messaging. He sometimes disagreed. Slowly, over time, he had started to feel more like a mascot than a partner. And yet, he still loved her. But the hardest part now was realizing that for all his efforts to build a life far away from the crown had never let go. It had followed him in every headline, every interview, every diplomatic whisper. He was still Prince Harry, and whether he liked it or not, the monarchy had the power to summon him back with a few documents and an agreement across government lines. The car pulled into the airstrip. A private jet, marked discreetly with a British insignia near the cockpit, awaited him. 2 men opened the door. No cameras. No journalists. Not yet. But someone would leak this. It was inevitable. The narrative was already being written, probably in newsrooms across London, New York, and Los Angeles. As he walked toward the plane, he glanced back one last time, not because he thought Meghan might arrive, but because he wanted to remember what it felt like to walk away. He boarded in silence. The interior was simple, leather seats with paneling, soft lighting. A steward greeted him with a nod and said, "Welcome aboard, Your Royal Highness." Harry flinched. That title. He hadn't used it in so long. Not in America. Not in his new life. But now it followed him again like a shadow. He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and closed his eyes. The flight would be 11 hours. Long enough for regret to marinate. Long enough for fear to settle. Long enough to prepare for what awaited him on the other side. A palace press team sharpening their statements, a waiting royal car, perhaps even his father or brother there to meet him. Not out of warmth, but to make sure he came back properly, without scandal, without spin. His thoughts drifted to Meghan. He could see her face, furious, stunned. Her accusations. "They got to you," she had said. Maybe they had. Or maybe, just maybe, the life they built wasn't as indestructible as they had believed. He opened the small compartment beside him and found a letter, not sealed, just folded, with his name written in familiar script. Inside it read, "Harry, you've gone far, and you've done what you thought was right. But we are still here. We're waiting. It's not too late. See, no signature. But he didn't need one. It was from King Charles, his father. He held the letter in his hand as the jet lifted off the tarmac. California grew smaller beneath him, the ocean stretching wide and endless beyond it. And all around him, silence, except for the engine's hum and the unbearable weight of consequence. Prince Harry was not kidnapped, but he was not free either. He was, in every sense of the word, caught in the crossfire. The term deported is often understood as a dramatic, involuntary ejection from a country, typically following a court ruling, a breach of law, or failure to comply with immigration terms. In the case of Prince Harry, however, the term hovered in a gray zone, technically not used by officials, but whispered, speculated, and splashed across headlines in the wake of his unexpected departure from the United States. What had led to this point wasn't a single violation or explosive scandal. It was a layered and quietly unfolding set of legal, political, and public relations calculations that had finally reached a boiling point. The roots of the controversy stretched back to 2023 when Prince Harry released his tell-all memoir, Spare. In its pages, he openly admitted to past drug use, including cocaine, marijuana, and psychedelic mushrooms. In most contexts, such confessions are dismissed as part of a celebrity's journey through youth and rebellion. But in the context of U.S. immigration law, those admissions carried legal implications far deeper than the public initially realized. Under United States law, specifically the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, foreign nationals who admit to illegal drug use can be deemed inadmissible. The key word here is admit. Even if there is no arrest record, a verbal or written admission of drug use may trigger an immigration review. More importantly, such an admission can potentially invalidate an existing visa or prevent renewal or adjustment of status. For most applicants, this would likely result in denial of a visa or a directive to leave the country. In Harry's case, however, his initial entry into the U.S. had been largely protected by diplomatic ties, celebrity status, and what many believe was a politically motivated look-the-other-way approach from the Department of Homeland Security. For nearly 3 years after his move to California, no official immigration review had been publicly disclosed. Journalists, advocacy groups, and legal experts began to ask, on what visa is Prince Harry living in the U.S.? That question became even more urgent when a Washington-based conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, filed a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request in early 2023 seeking to examine whether Harry had received special treatment. The request was specific. They wanted to know if the Duke of Sussex had disclosed his drug use on his visa application, and if not, whether he had violated immigration regulations. Initially, the U.S. government stonewalled. DHS refused to disclose Prince Harry's immigration records, citing privacy concerns and national security. But pressure continued to mount. Legal scholars began to chime in, noting that average citizens would face immediate denial or deportation for the same admissions. Columnists wrote that the public had the right to know whether the system was being bent for the rich and famous. The discussion moved beyond tabloids. CNN, The New York Times, and The Guardian began covering the story. Meghan and Harry's team declined to comment publicly. Behind closed doors, however, there were urgent meetings. Lawyers, publicists, and consultants discussed worst-case scenarios. And slowly, quietly, a shift occurred. According to leaked reports from 2 independent sources in Los Angeles legal circles, Harry's legal team had received informal communications from government contacts suggesting that a full review of his immigration status was imminent. The warning was clear. It would be better for him to voluntarily leave and return at a later date with renewed documentation than risk a public hearing or revocation. That is where the British government stepped in. It is believed that the palace had already anticipated the potential fallout. While they publicly maintained a distance from Harry's affairs in America, private intelligence shared with senior royal aides indicated growing tension between U.S. immigration authorities and the Sussex household. What troubled the palace wasn't just the legal threat. It was the unpredictable media chaos that would follow. If Prince Harry were formally deported, the global narrative would be catastrophic. Images of him being escorted out of LAX would forever stain the image of the monarchy, reinforcing the perception of Harry as a disgraced prince, unwanted in 2 nations. So, the recall was initiated. Diplomatically labeled a re-engagement consultation, it offered a clean exit. No legal drama, no courtroom cameras, no headlines screaming deported. Instead, it would appear to be a dignified royal family request, one that Prince Harry agreed to out of duty, not pressure. But was that the full story? Digging deeper, there's another layer. One that connects with the Archewell Foundation, the nonprofit established by Harry and Meghan as a core part of their identity in the United States. In the past year, investigative journalists had begun probing into Archewell's finances. Not for embezzlement or fraud, but for irregularities in spending and compliance with U.S. tax laws governing charitable entities. Whispers emerged that large sums had been spent on lifestyle-related expenses, security, travel, private events, that appeared more personal than philanthropic. Though no charges were filed, the scrutiny intensified. Meghan's frequent public appearances, designer wardrobes, and luxury trips, some allegedly billed as foundation business, only fueled speculation. A few watchdog groups began linking the immigration inquiry with the financial questions, suggesting a broader investigation was underway into whether Prince Harry's visa had been granted based on charitable activity that was now in question. Then there was the matter of residency. Sources close to the case confirmed that Prince Harry had never sought permanent residency or U.S. citizenship. This was likely intentional. Applying for permanent residency would have required deeper background checks, medical evaluations, and the full disclosure of any past drug use, all of which would be hard to conceal or mitigate once made formal. By remaining on a visa, likely an O-1 Extraordinary Ability visa, he kept a degree of flexibility. But that flexibility came with a cost: renewals, reevaluation, and potential political exposure. Which brings us to the final catalyst, the expiration window. Documents obtained by a private legal reporter and later verified by a federal source indicated that Harry's current visa was set to expire within the next 6 months. A renewal would require updated documentation and a fresh declaration of legal fitness to remain in the country. With drug admissions on the record and public scrutiny mounting, approval was far from guaranteed. In private, Meghan reportedly lobbied aggressively to keep him in the U.S., hiring top immigration attorneys and preparing to challenge any visa denial. But according to palace insiders, British intelligence advised the royal family that such a public battle would be disastrous. Not only would it draw attention to Harry's weaknesses, but it would also turn the monarchy into a passive participant in a transatlantic legal war. The royal brand was already under pressure. Another scandal would be crippling. So the offer was made: come back voluntarily. Reassess your role. Cooperate. In return, no one would use the word deportation. Harry accepted. Not because he felt guilty or defeated, but because he saw no other path forward. A fight in U.S. immigration court could take years. A public scandal would damage his children's future. And Meghan, increasingly under fire in the media, couldn't carry the burden alone. Yet the sting of the departure remained. Because despite all the formalities, the titles, the negotiations, and the carefully drafted statements, everyone understood the truth. Harry had been cornered. Not physically, but politically, legally, emotionally. The American dream he had tried to build was unraveling. Some analysts now argue that Harry's story should serve as a case study, not of privilege, but of what happens when international law, personal fame, and unresolved trauma collide. Others believe it marks the beginning of the end for his experiment in reinvention. That no matter how far he ran, the institution he left behind would always have a hand on his shoulder, pulling him back when the world began to ask too many questions. As the private jet carried him across the Atlantic, American journalists continued debating whether this was voluntary. UK tabloids spun it as a graceful return. Meghan's allies whispered betrayal, coercion, and loss. Meanwhile, legal experts simply nodded. They had seen this before. Not at this scale. Not with this level of fame. But the mechanism was the same. Push hard enough, and the system pushes back. Prince Harry wasn't deported, they'll insist. But he didn't stay either. He left. Quietly. Without a press conference. Without a legal fight. Without saying goodbye. When Meghan Markle stood on the steps of her Montecito mansion just minutes after Prince Harry's departure, the expression on her face was not that of resignation. It was strategy. She wasn't going to let this moment pass quietly into history. As the engines of the royal diplomatic convoy faded into the hills and American officers packed away their equipment, Meghan was already on her second call, this time to her legal team, not emergency services. The brief conversation she had with her lead attorney, an aggressive Beverly Hills-based litigator with experience in high-stakes celebrity disputes, sparked what would become one of the most controversial legal responses in recent royal history. Within an hour, her team began drafting an official filing to the U.S. Department of Justice, labeling the incident as a potential violation of United States criminal law, specifically, a violation under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which includes federal statutes relating to kidnapping, coercion, and unlawful removal of individuals. The core of Meghan's claim was not built on physical force. That would be easy to disprove. Rather, it was built on psychological coercion, deception, and unauthorized diplomatic overreach. Her attorneys framed the incident as a covert foreign operation executed on American soil against the will of the complainant's spouse, intended to undermine the integrity of his U.S. residency through psychological intimidation and soft diplomatic enforcement. The language was dense, legalistic, intentionally theatrical. But that was the point. This wasn't just a legal filing. It was a media maneuver, a public declaration of war. By early evening, Meghan's legal team had submitted an inquiry to the DOJ, requested a review from Interpol, and began circulating memos to several congressional offices known to be critical of lax immigration enforcement for the wealthy. At the same time, behind closed doors, they contacted a prominent civil rights attorney, signaling that if necessary, they were prepared to pursue civil litigation against both the British government and its consular representatives in California. The foundation of their argument rested on a handful of shaky legal premises, yet the drama it created was undeniable. First, they argued that Prince Harry was not capable of giving free and informed consent under the conditions in which he was approached. They cited Meghan's 911 call as evidence of immediate distress and disorientation. They described the documentation brought by the British agents as intimidating, rushed, and presented without legal representation or judicial process. Furthermore, they claimed that Harry's visa status had not been officially revoked, and therefore, any pressure to leave the country amounted to extralegal manipulation designed to circumvent U.S. sovereign law. Second, Meghan's team argued that because Harry was a resident of California and co-owner of several U.S.-based charitable and business entities, any attempt to remove him from the country without legal intervention constituted an act of forced expatriation in direct violation of his existing legal footprint in the United States. Finally, and most controversially, the legal memo used the word abduction, not as a criminal charge, at least not yet, but as a rhetorical cornerstone of the public narrative they wanted to build. The message was clear. Meghan would not sit quietly while her husband was removed under a veil of secrecy, legality, and foreign pressure. If the royal family wanted to reclaim Harry, they would have to fight her in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. Within 24 hours, the media response was immense. CNN's legal analysts debated the merits of Meghan's claims, calling it a bold and unusual strategy, while simultaneously noting that the success of such a case was highly unlikely given the voluntary nature of Harry's departure and the legitimacy of diplomatic documentation presented at the scene. Fox News criticized Meghan for weaponizing the U.S. legal system for personal vendettas, calling her the face of privileged chaos. Social media was flooded with commentary. Hashtags like #RoyalKidnapping and #JusticeForHarry began trending on X and Instagram. Conspiracy theorists latched onto the idea that Harry was being reprogrammed in the UK to forget his American life. Meghan's supporters framed her as a mother and wife standing up against centuries-old power structures. Detractors said she was spiraling into narcissistic delusion. As legal teams on both sides mobilized, another player quietly entered the scene: the British Foreign Office. While the palace maintained its silence, it was the Foreign Office that made the first move, issuing a brief but pointed statement to British and American media outlets. We are confident that all diplomatic procedures were observed in accordance with the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. The individual in question, His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, consented to return to the United Kingdom and was not under duress. Any claims to the contrary are unfounded. The statement was calculated. It referred to Harry by his full royal title, reminding everyone, especially Meghan, that the institution she was challenging had not relinquished its authority over him. Legal experts chimed in. One former Justice Department official, interviewed by the Washington Post, described Meghan's claim as legally novel, but mostly performative. He added, "This isn't about winning a case. This is about creating narrative leverage." And leverage it created. By the end of the week, Meghan's legal team announced they were filing a formal motion in the Ninth Circuit Court requesting an injunction that would bar any further diplomatic involvement with Prince Harry until an independent review could be conducted. The filing included screenshots of Harry's immigration status history, obtained through a FOIA leak, his recent charitable engagements, and even references to mental health advocacy work that positioned him as an American humanitarian figure, deserving of U.S. legal protection. At the center of all this was a single person, Harry himself, who, by then, was halfway through his time at Windsor Castle, isolated from press, removed from electronics, and reportedly undergoing a series of closed-door meetings with royal advisors. No public statements had been issued from him since his departure. No interviews. No posts. No leaks. Just silence. That silence became Meghan's greatest enemy and greatest opportunity. Without a clear statement from Harry, she could frame the narrative as she wished. She could say he was isolated, that he wasn't allowed to speak, that he was being held in emotional captivity. She used words like psychological coercion and emotional exploitation in her filings, implying that even if Harry didn't see it now, he would eventually. Insiders at Archewell described Meghan as tense but resolute. She continued her public appearances. She continued to work with her team. But behind closed doors, there were signs of unraveling. Reports emerged that several staff members had quietly resigned. One high-level consultant was said to have told friends, "She's going to war with the kingdom. This isn't going to end well." Despite mounting pressure, Meghan refused to withdraw her legal complaints. In fact, she doubled down. Within 2 weeks of Harry's departure, she filed a second motion, this time directly addressing the Biden administration, demanding that the White House protect the residency rights of legal immigrants facing international coercion. The Biden administration did not respond directly. However, a senior official, speaking anonymously, told Reuters, "We're not interested in being pulled into a private family matter between British nationals. The legal immigration process will be reviewed as standard. There will be no political interference." Meghan's strategy had reached its limit. No arrests were made. No diplomatic sanctions were issued. The Justice Department quietly noted Meghan's filings, opened a limited inquiry into procedural legitimacy, and shelved it. The British government did not respond further. And Harry, still silent, became the story's most elusive character, both present and absent, both central and unreachable. In the absence of tangible results, Meghan's legal gamble turned from a battle into a statement, a defiant declaration that she would not be erased, that she would not let the palace reclaim Harry without consequence. Whether it was desperation or brilliance remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, by accusing royal agents of kidnapping, Meghan had made a move no royal spouse had ever dared to make. She didn't just resist. She rewrote the battlefield. As Prince Harry's private jet descended through the thick English clouds and touched down at RAF Northolt, a subdued military airbase west of London, the British royal family was already several steps ahead. What had occurred in Montecito just hours earlier was no longer just an American media incident. It was now a royal emergency requiring immediate containment, coordination, and communication. Inside the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace, behind thick velvet curtains and beneath centuries-old chandeliers, a silent war room had been activated. The monarchy, despite its soft power and ceremonial veneer, is a meticulously calculated institution. Every move, every appearance, every word is carefully measured for public perception, political neutrality, and dynastic stability. The re-entry of Prince Harry into the United Kingdom under such sensational and volatile circumstances was a seismic event. It wasn't just about one prince, it was about control, legitimacy, and how far the crown was willing to go to bring a wandering royal back into its sphere. Sources close to the palace revealed that King Charles III had personally overseen the plan to request Harry's return. While the king had maintained an outward appearance of distance from his younger son since the Sussex's explosive Oprah interview in 2021, those close to him say that emotionally, Charles had never truly disconnected. But he had become harder, less forgiving. The cumulative effect of public accusations, transatlantic interviews, and tell-all books had forced him to draw a line. And when legal complications surrounding Harry's U.S. visa and his relationship with American legal systems came to a head, the king saw an opportunity to act. Before the plane had even landed, senior palace aides had drafted a preliminary statement, though it was never released. It read, His Royal Highness the Duke of Sussex has returned to the United Kingdom for discussions related to the royal family's future and his role therein. We welcome his presence. But the words never made it to the press. That was deliberate. Internally, there were disagreements over tone, language, and implication. Was this a reconciliation or a recalibration? Were they welcoming him back, or assessing the damage he had caused? Queen Camilla, now more deeply embedded in royal operations following her elevation to queen consort, was reportedly unsympathetic to Harry's plight. According to sources within Clarence House, she advised the king to maintain a firm stance. He chose to leave, she is alleged to have said. Let him understand what that means. Camilla had never been fully accepted by the Sussexes, particularly Meghan, whose friction with royal tradition often clashed with Camilla's measured adherence to protocol. Camilla viewed Harry's return not as a family moment, but as a necessary strategic recalibration. Prince William, Harry's elder brother and now heir apparent, took a more private approach. He did not attend the arrival meeting, though it was rumored that he had been briefed on every detail. Relations between the brothers had been nearly non-existent for months. Since the publication of Spare, in which Harry accused William of aggression and coldness, the two had reportedly not spoken directly. But the moment required a response. William's private secretary arranged for a confidential meeting between Harry and a neutral mediator within the royal family's legal advisory circle. The meeting, which took place 2 days after Harry's arrival, was designed to assess Harry's intentions. Was he back temporarily, under duress? Or was he open to renegotiating his status within the monarchy? The meeting was not warm, but it was necessary.